Hey there, you are listening to the Moxie Podcast, and I'm your host, Jenny Nuccio, global social entrepreneur who loves to do a lot of good in this world, and best known for being the founder and CEO of the Money Collective. This show started with the simple idea of shining light on ordinary people doing courageous things in this world, and over the years has grown to be a hub of not only courageous conversations, but resources, knowledge, and connection. From topics of sustainability to leadership to, of course, a good dose of social entrepreneurship. If you're looking to grow in your knowledge, develop as a leader, and create a ripple effect of impact in this world, then welcome, Changemaker. It is time to ignite your Moxie. Welcome to the Moxie Podcast. Grab your water, grab your coffee. I'm going to take a sip for you guys. And let's hop into this conversation. We are in a series called Charity Unscripted. So if you're not familiar with the Moxie Podcast, we have moved not just from the sound waves, but we are also on YouTube with our channel, the Moxie Podcast there. You might be watching from that, and that's where you're discovering us. If this is the first time you're discovering us, then you can go 3 years back of content where you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, all the things. But I'm excited to be here. So we are going through a series this month called Charity Unscripted. I focus a lot on social entrepreneurship, social injustice, social impact, this space. It's something that I live and breathe in, I'm an expert in, and so we love to pull topics from this area. And with charity, we find that social impact, social enterprises, social entrepreneurs stem from passion projects. Most of the time that starts from a philanthropic idea, that starts from a nonprofit organization, and it starts with charity, right? We start kind of with that executive director hat on. We think in that way. We think how we can get people around us, for our cause. And then as we try to create sustainable solutions, as we try to create strategy, that's when we start to make the move into social enterprise spaces, into hybrid models and such. Now, as that over the last 10 years has become more prevalent, it's kind of changed a little bit. Most people come into the space with strategy. They come in the space wanting to combat a social justice issue, wanting to change a generational pattern, wanting to change a problem for good, for a community, and they do have a strategy. And the genesis of social impact and creating sustainability around that was not really the story 10, 20, 30, even 40 years ago. So what I want to talk about today, and the whole point of this series in Charity Unscripted, is to pull from the charity side, right? To pull from the nonprofit side, to understand that nonprofit is still good, that you don't necessarily have to be in this hybrid model per se that I love and that I teach on, but that you can still do really good work within your nonprofit and within that scope. But there are things that are misunderstood. There are things in the nonprofit that we can be better at and that we can create change for the future of what nonprofit and charity should look like for our audience, right? So in the first episode of this series called Charity Unscripted, we talked about overhead and how overhead is misunderstood and how people view that and what that goes to. And if we don't have overhead, then a lot of times our programs can fail, or they can be they can hurt in some way because we just don't have the right people running the programs. The second thing that we talked about in the second episode was charity. Can we trust it? Can we trust it as a whole? Kind of gave different examples of organizations that are out there, gave different challenges, some myths of nonprofits, and how we can combat that as we lead into that space. And what I want to talk about today is, yes, meaningful work. I want to talk about what we do, what drives us and our passion and our why, and how we can be better at communicating that. But I also want to talk about the downfall of media. There's positives and there's negatives of media. So I do want to talk about meaningful work destroyed by media. That is the title of this episode today. And when I first went into planning this, when I first thought of how I wanted to approach this and talk to you about it, is I really wanted to come from a case study format. I really wanted to share examples, and I'll name a few today, but I believe that I kind of want to direct that attention to go back to the documentary Uncharitable, to read the book Uncharitable, to go back to Dan Pallotta's talk TED Talk about general overhead and all of that, because that is what this series is stemmed from and inspired by. And so they already give great evidence. They already give great insight into how media has both helped and both destroyed nonprofits. And they really focus on how they've kind of torn down nonprofits because of the false media that's out there. So I'm going to direct your attention to that if you do have access to the documentary Uncharitable by Stephen Gyllenhaal, who produced it based on Dan Pallotta's TED Talk, then I encourage you to go find that. But I want to start with us as nonprofit leaders and us who are really leading our organization. So whether you're a director of development, you're the executive director, you're the president, maybe you're a program director, you lead the team, you cast the vision. If you are in that role, you don't have to be the founder of it, but if you are in that role, I'm really talking to you because you start kind of the ripple of your culture and the effects that your organization portrays to the outer world, right? There's a lot of stuff happening internally and behind the scenes, and how you lead will completely transform how your team leads and how you are encompassing your mission outwardly to other people. So I want to talk a little bit about the communication side of that. And we touched on this in the episodes before, and I continuously touch on this just as a leader in this space, because I truly believe it all starts with authenticity of who you are. We need to step into the space and be authentic. We need to make sure that when we're talking to donors, when we're cultivating new relationships with foundations, when we're standing in front of a crowd and sharing our story, that we're not only being authentic, but we're being consistent. That we're not changing our language, that we're not changing the way that we show up in spaces, because when we can be authentic and consistent and geared down into our values, then that is where trust and rapport is built. And when you can build that trust and rapport, then people are going to be able to gravitate towards you. So that's kind of an in-person thing, but both that in-person feel of being authentic, being real, showing up and just being your true self also is in your words and in media, whether that's blogs, whether that's emails, whether that's video, whether that's campaigns that you're running. The way that you show up in a space in person should also be the same way that you show up in the space in your media and your communications. Now, with being authentic, with being yourself, with being true to your values, I also want to encourage you to share stories of transformation and share stories of empowerment versus sharing stories of kind of this disheartening and sad and disempowering exploitive stories, right? We want to pull away from that. We want to pull away from exploiting hardships. I know that's the reason maybe we step into a community, because we want to see transformation, but we want to look at this other side, the bright side of what your intervention and what your program and what your nonprofit is doing, and share that story better. And we also want to share the stories that we have permission to share, because even in the good stories, right? Even in the beautiful stories where we can say, man, this person was a drug addict. They entered our program and intervention. They went through it. They got community. They got support. You know, maybe now they're 5 years sober and they're living this beautiful life, can keep a consistent job or putting their kids through school, whatever it may be. That's an amazing transformation story that was rooted and started with the program or intervention that you run and that you're a part of. But it's also not your story to tell unless they want it to be told, right? And we need to respect that, because it might be the poster child, right? Or the perfect story to give donors and to hand to them, but we got to get permission. And we don't need to exploit stories, even if they are great stories, right? So I want to encourage you in that. So that's where I want to start, but where I want to lead to is media as a whole. And I'm not talking about social media strategies. I'm not talking about us and our marketing and our emails, because the people that we're talking to there love us. They're following us because they like what we do. They've gravitated to what we're doing. They potentially know you as a leader. So that's why they're coming to you. Not necessarily talking about that media. I'm talking about the mass media. We're talking about large news channels, both domestically and internationally. We're talking about things that just immediately go viral, right? that media has power, and it also has this influence on communities, whether good or bad, whether telling true information or false information, right? And we as nonprofits need to know how to have a crisis management kind of plan when backlash potentially might happen. Now, it's kind of like one of those things when I think about even our organization, Amani Collective, I'm like, man, if we were on the Today Show and if we were on CNN and people actually knew our story, this would be amazing. But the reality is, no matter what you put out there, no matter what good, there's always going to be people who want to tear it down. We live in a world that is harsh. And even though we see the best in people, I see the absolute best in people, there are always going to be people that see the latter, right? And that's something that we have to be ready for if we're going to go into mainstream spaces, if we have a PR company backing us up, if we're going to put more money into that space that is actually going to give us the platform for our voice to be heard in wide and far places. So I want to give you 2 examples. Actually, 3 examples. Some of these examples, I'm not going to go deep into them because, again, I want to lead your attention to Uncharitable. I'm going to keep repeating that because truly is a moving documentary. One of the examples they talk about is Kony 2012. This campaign ran in 2012 and was ran by, I believe his name was Jason. And he started this campaign, really started a video of just wanting to get awareness of what was happening in Uganda, right? And happening down from Uganda and into the DRC with child soldiers, right? And them being captured, them going into enslavement, basically, them being forced to be a soldier and to kill at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old or beyond, right? These kind of horrendous things that the West don't really even think are fathomable, right? Or even think exist, and they do. So in 2012, this video came out. You can still find it on YouTube. It's about a 30-minute video if you look up Kony 2012. And it talks about the nature of Facebook and that there's even more Facebook, at that time. Now we have other social media channels, but at that time there were more people on Facebook than there were in the world in population even 10 years before. Some crazy statistic that they start the video with. And then they move into sharing these facts. Now, what happened really quickly is, one, they got mass media viral attention. Now, for the first week, this went up and down within a week or 2. So this is how fast media can be on your side and then destroy you and switch on you really quickly, that we need to be aware and we need to be cognizant of, because even though this is at a macro level, this is at a large scale, this also happens in the micro and meso levels too, and in areas that we're working and are serving, that maybe we have local media, or maybe we even have supporters or organizations that are on our side, and immediately they can turn, depending on how we present ourselves or what we're putting in forefront. So overall, Kony went up in a week. Everyone knew about it. There was posters all over it. People were being aware. People were donating. They were able to do a lot of good. If you look at just in the short amount of time what they were able to do in the awareness and the rescues and the things that happened were really amazing. And I'm not going to quote all of that as I don't have it exactly in front of me. But in the week after, what happened is there was this pressure to continue to show up. And then there were a lot of people saying that it was just a scam, right? Those people that were just there to tear it down. Scam, they just wanted to get their name out there. None of that money is being used in the right way. All false information that was being pushed forth. And it crumbled. It made Jason crumble, the leader, and it broke him mentally. He talks about this in Uncharitable, like he literally mentally went crazy. They have a video of him running in the streets naked. Like just a week before he put out this campaign, and the week after he's just running in the streets because he was so overwhelmed with stress and so overwhelmed with what the media was portraying and didn't know how to get himself out of the hole to tell people this is so not true. The reality of that situation, and there was absolutely no way he could have gotten himself out of the hole, because people are going to continue to put false accusations out on media. And as an organization, you have to have a plan. You have a crisis, contingent plan of how you're going to handle these situations. That's what PR's for, right? You have public relation people who cover celebrities, who cover athletes, because when things go bad or they have bad publicity, guess what? They know exactly what to do to step in. As nonprofits, I don't think we ever think that potentially things are going to go viral, because our heart place is not necessarily there in the beginning. Our heart place is to get awareness to people of what's going on. In the end, Kony 2012 dissipated. It was the campaign was attached to Invisible Children's Project, and you can look more into that. Jason stepped down, leadership changed, and they still did a lot of good. The beautiful part of it is the impact still happened. The sad part of it is that campaign has stained media, has stained the internet forever, right? It's a digital footprint they can never delete. And so what I want to kind of put a fair warning out to you is that you may be doing amazing work, and media can either be behind you in 1 second and destroy you in the next. Another example is Wounded Warrior Project. And Wounded Warrior Project really links back to also the overhead conversation, because Wounded Warrior Project was started to actually help veterans get services, to get education, to get basic needs after coming back from war, after being amputees, whatever it might be. And the way that they handled their fundraising was quite different than other, I would say, small micro nonprofits. And they spent millions and millions of dollars on marketing. And you can look into their numbers. They raised $200 million. And then the next year they had this spike and raised over $380 million. And then people asked, well, where is that money going to? And so they started to look at their books. As a nonprofit, your books are open source. That's in your 990. You can find that on any charity navigator system online. You can look up people and see exactly what their executive directors are being paid. You can see where their money is going to their programs. Nonprofit is there's a reason why those things are public, and that's to also keep accountability. But the reality of that being public is that people can construe that information in many, many different ways. So what happened with the Warrior Wounded Project is, even though they might have been outputting tons of money towards marketing, the actual input of donations that was happening and the impact that was happening was continuously increasing year over year. They ran a big campaign on just TV ads. And they also did it over Super Bowl weekend. And they just were really smart with who their ICA was, right? Who is their clientele? Who are the people they're talking to? Where are they going to be watching? And they showed up in those spaces. They knew that those people that they were going to pull heartstrings with, that are going to donate, are not necessarily on social media, right? That wasn't their play. They're just going to be on their TV watching good sports on the weekend, and we want to be the ad that's in between all of that. So they spent a lot of money on those specific ads, and it did in the end bring a lot of money. But they saw one year they had over $380 million come in, and then the next year they almost lost $200 million because media portrayed them as wrongly spending the cash. Whether or not it's true, and I won't get in the nitty-gritties of that because that's not the purpose of this podcast today, whether or not it's true, what I want to portray here is the power of words, the power of what's in the information given, right? We can look at anything in the history outside of nonprofits, from the aid crisis to the pandemic to whatever we want to pinpoint or talk about, and the media is always involved. The media is always influencing, and there's most likely always a political kind of twist on it as well, right? And we're not going to get political on this podcast either. But the reality is it can portray a different story than what's happening, and most people aren't going to dig. They just want the information, they want the feel-good gift, and media can completely change your story. The last example is Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood gives a lot of different services for women, for just planning in general, for health, especially for marginalized populations. It's a clinic that they can go in. They also do other services as well that we are very much aware of. I am not necessarily as in aligned with Planned Parenthood in my views, and so I will put that out there. But I do believe that the services that they do offer for certain populations is really, really important. Now, what's happened that we're very much aware of in the last 10 years with Planned Parenthood is at the forefront. You can go to Live Action Org. Live Action Org is a pro-life platform on Instagram, as well as they have they're constantly on CNN and large news channels. And Live Action Org is always going to be the opposite of what Planned Parenthood is trying to do, right? And Live Action Org, that organization, is pretty much putting out every abortion video that you can imagine. Whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, that's not, again, this conversation. The conversation here is how media, how words, how influence can change the way someone views your organization. So although 60%, 70%, whatever that percentage is, of other services Planned Parenthood offers, the only thing being scrutinized or seen is their abortion services, right? So again, whether you believe in that or not, that's not the conversation. The conversation is when we hear Planned Parenthood, I bet you the first thing you thought of was abortion. That is the power of media. That's the power of influence. That's the power of negative press as well, and how it can completely take other meaningful work, turn people's eyes to see something else, and destroy what you're doing. And eventually we see organizations over and over again dissipate because they've lost the trust and rapport. So I'm going to circle back to what we started with. There's not much that we can, to be honest, control with media. But what we can control is how we consistently show up, how we consistently report, how we consistently share stories, and how it is aligned with who we are and our mission. The more that we can show up in spaces that we do not change our story, that we are true to what we say, that we are already transparent with where money is flowing and putting that forefront to our audience. When media tries to come around, we should have so much traction and facts that we can actually stand a little bit more firm, because we can actually pull historic posts. We can pull historic impact reports. We can pull historicals to fight potentially what a media outlet is trying to pull us down in, if that makes sense. I want you guys to think of that. Like, we need to start now, no matter how small you are, with sharing exactly what you have going on, with being as authentic as I hope and would love for you to be, so that your donors keep showing up, so that you continue to keep cultivating a community. Because the only way to combat a media so large is to have a very strong community that can come behind you and be the voice for you. Because you won't be able to do it alone. We will not be able to fight such large forces, such large influence. But if you've built an authentic community, when we look at social media, gosh, it's powerful. And if you have people continuously fighting for you on your behalf on those platforms, then there's more of a conversation and a dialogue versus just being like destroyed and drowned in the media and not getting to have your voice be heard. So when we're looking at Charity Unscripted as a whole, there's all of these different facets of philanthropy, of charity, of distrust, of the way organizations have misused funding. And I think that's a sad part of the nonprofit world, is that there's still nonprofits that are a little bit clever with their wording and how they kind of hide where funds are going. And I want to encourage you to take a different road. Being an ethical impact leader in a nonprofit space or in a social impact world, or you run a social enterprise, whatever entity you may be in, it starts with you as the leader. And you influence both internally and externally. And the only way that we're going to get, our donors and our people in our community to change the way that they view nonprofits is if they get an experience that's beautiful, right? If they get an experience that is something to remember and not something to kind of scoff at or be worried about. You have the power to change that experience, you have the power of influence, and my hope for you is that you can just continue to do that for good. So thank you always for being part of this Moxie community, for joining us today. And I just want to continue to encourage you onward. I'm always here for you, cheering you on. Seriously, if you ever need support or have questions, please go to Jenny Nuccio on Instagram, send me a message. I am the queen of voice notes, as I tell people, and I would love to support you, to encourage you, to help you in any way, to plug you into communities that will make you feel less isolated as a leader, and give you resources that will encourage you to be stronger, and also to just understand strategy, right? And how you're going to move forward together with your team and your nonprofit. Do not feel alone. This is a community that you're welcomed in. And as always, I can't wait to see you next week. Moxie on. I love that you were able to join me today, and I'm grateful for the community at the Moxie Podcast that continues to grow. To make this show even better, I would love if you could take some time to leave a review, take a screenshot of this episode, share it on your stories, and don't forget to tag the Moxie Podcast. I would love to find a way to connect with you. Until next week, friends, Moxie on.